all the banks went belly up in 2008. In April 2009, under Gordon Brown, who was then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, there was a meeting of the G7, the G10, the G20 in London. They coordinated the printing presses of the various central banks, from the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Sweden, the Bank of Switzerland, the Bank of Japan, and so on. They printed a lot of money and they refloated finance. But in so doing, given that the other side of the same coin was austerity for the vast majority of people in the world, you had a combination of austerity for the many and socialism for the bankers with printed money. I don't want to focus on whether this was fair, unfair, it boosted inequality. Of course, it was unfair, and of course, it boosted inequality, but it did something far more significant from the perspective of the lecture that I am delivering tonight. It replaced the role of profits in capitalism with central bank money. Now, as I said before, capitalism has undergone a variety of metamorphoses since its inception in late 18th century in England, Scotland, Wales, and Amsterdam. But all those varieties of capitalism had one thing in common. One thing in common. Actually, two. They had two pillars. All these capitalisms were based on two pillars. One was that the engine that drove them was private profit. Capital accumulation markets called it private profit. The second one was that all the exploitation, all the money making, all the value creation, exchange value creation was happening through markets, labor markets, product markets, energy markets, futures markets, financial markets. Markets, profits, the two pillars of capitalism. Well, my thesis, or part of my thesis, is that from 2009 onwards, the role that profits used to play in fueling the engine that pulled capitalism ahead was profits were replaced by central bank money. And you can see that most of the most important companies of the last 10, 15 years don't really make profits. If you look at Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, Spotify, Tesla, very little profits, if any. If any. What drives them is a stock exchange where their shares are going through the roof. And why are the shares going through the roof? Because central banks have been printing the money to make sure that the financial markets remain in rude health. The second pillar, markets, they are on the way out, and I've already explained why. Because command capital has risen to such an extent that not only does it tell us what we want, but it also creates the platforms on which we can actually buy that which they tell us that we want. And remember, these are not markets, they're platforms. The moment you enter Amazon.com, you have exited capitalism. In the same way that the moment you walk into the Google campus in California, you exit capitalism because you enter a centrally planned organization with a complete hierarchy. There's no market in Google. In the same way, there is no market in General Motors. There is no market in Volkswagen. The moment you enter the factory, there's no market there. It's like, a Stalinist organization. Maybe it's quite pleasant, but it's still a hierarchical, top-down, non-market organization. The moment you enter Amazon.com, remember, there is one person that owns the algorithm that determines, once you are in Amazon.com, what you see, what you can buy, what you can't buy, what you can't see. Some people see one thing, other people see another thing. It's this algorithm that determines that. This is not a market. This is like a feudal estate, a fiefdom. Only it's a digital one, a digital fiefdom. So if you take seriously my hypothesis so far, what we have is a new kind of capital, which I call command capital, that has given rise to a new ruling class, the Capitalists, with traditional capitalists becoming subsumed, becoming a vassal class vis-a-vis the Capitalists. You have the replacement of profit-making with central bank money, which creates new ways of telling people what to do. Because if you are Elon Musk, for instance, your capacity to make the world go round draws from the value of your shares, of the shares of Tesla, of SpaceX, and so on. And those values are not that much related to profit at all. They're related to the state money that central banks are printing, as well as to the command capital of companies that can, through, even when you buy a Tesla, it is command capital that directs the car. You know that when you buy a car like a Tesla, unlike a Volkswagen or Ford or, a Jaguar, the company can just press a button and switch off your car or stop updating it. And that's it. Your car is kaput very, very soon after that. So capital may indeed be everywhere. And it's clearly on a rampage. It is on a triumphant march, flattening democracies, flattening social capital, flattening labor, creating an ever-burgeoning precariat, a vassal capitalist class. Let's begin with capital, shall we? Now, what's capital? It's not money. It's not a kind of divinity. It's something very tangible. Economists, and I used to be an economist up until fairly recently, we define capital as goods that have been produced for the purposes of assisting in the production of other goods. In other words, produced means of production. That was what capital was. Robinson Crusoe's salvaged fishing gear in fiction, a farmer's plow back in ancient times, in feudal times today, a smith's furnace or hammer. These are manufactured goods that help produce a larger catch of fish, more food, shiny, steely tools. This is what capital has always been. Capital, of course, preceded capitalism. Capitalism is a system, a mode of production and distribution of goods and services, in which the power to compel others to do things is vested in those who have ownership over capital goods. In the previous mode of production, under feudalism, power sprang out of ownership of land. With the transition, the great transformation from feudalism to capitalism, increasingly power shifted from those who had land to those who owned capital goods. Capitalism vested the owners of capital with two new powers. The first power was to compel those who did not have capital to work for them. That's the whole point of being a capitalist. Your ownership of capital goods means that you have the power, the bargaining power over people who do not own capital goods, the only capital that they have to offer is their own human labor, to work for you. The second power, of course, is the power of the capitalist class, of those who own the majority of capital goods, to set the agenda, and to set the agenda in the various fora where big, important decisions are taken on behalf of everyone. In the past, under feudalism, it was the landowners that had the power to set the agenda. My hypothesis, which I want to share with you and to try to explain and to convince you about, is that we now have a new form of capital. When I say now, I mean the last 10, 15 years or so. A new form of capital, I shall be arguing, is emerging. And as it does, as it emerges, as it does so, it is forging a new ruling class, a spanking new ruling class, even a new mode of production. There's a second power that command capital grants its owners, whom I call cloudalists. The same algorithms that guide our purchases also have the capacity surreptitiously to command us, the users, directly to produce new command capital for the cloudalists. I need to stress the importance of this. Under capitalism, the only way capital could be generated, could be produced, was when a capitalist had workers working for her or him, usually him, through the production of surplus value. An amount of that surplus value was reinvested into capital goods. So the only way capital could breed was through the labor market, through the labor process, through the manufacturing that was taking place using waged labor at the factory, in the office, in the supermarket. But what I'm saying here is that the cloudalists have a power that no capitalist ever had. They have the power to make you and I, unwaged, without even realizing that we're working for them, produce part of their command capital. Every time we move around with our phone that has Google Maps on it, Google Maps knows where we are, that increases the command capital of Google. So we are contributing directly capital, not through some kind of market, without us being waged or part of the labor process at all. This is a new power that capitalists never had. While all this, let me just make the point as a preface that it was a bit of a Sputnik moment for the United States big tech sector, because just like in the 1950s, when it was the Americans who were completely and utterly convinced that they were decades ahead of the Soviet Union, suddenly the Soviet Union is in space before they are. So there is this similarity. Now, of course, that Sputnik moment made the United States go crazy in investing in the space age. And the result was that they not only caught up, but they surpassed the Soviet Union. I don't think this is going to happen now with big tech. But allow me to make the main point. The main point is this. And I think this is the main point of your question. Google, Meta, Amazon, they have nothing to fear. OpenAI is destroyed. And the reason for that is OpenAI has a business model which is really very old-fashioned capitalist model. They are selling a service, a product, a commodity in a market. So, they're asking you to pay $200 a month for the good quality ChatGPT.
Right.
And you buy that in the same way you buy a subscription to a cable channel, you buy gas to put in your car. It's a standard capitalist enterprise.
Right.
And here comes DeepSeek and offers the same product, even better, actually. I've been looking into it recently and, comparing and contrasting. Actually, DeepSeek is more impressive than ChatGPT, at least in my brief experience, for free. So essentially, that's it. The market of GPT has gone. But you mentioned my concept of what I considered a mutation of capital, a new form of capital, which I call cloud capital. It's the algorithm of Amazon, not just of Amazon, of Uber, or of Airbnb, of Google, and so on. But let's stick to Amazon as an example. It's going to be made much better with AI. It's going to be made more efficient. But even before AI came, if you had an Alexa, and this is the interface that you can buy very cheaply to connect you to all your appliances, and of course to Amazon.com. And it's an Amazon product. It's an interface which presents itself as your slave. You tell it, Alexa, switch off the lights, order some milk and honey for me from the supermarket, buy me a book, play me some music. So it sounds as if it is your slave, but it isn't, of course. What it does, it trains you to train it, to know you, to give you good advice, then to capture your attention through this good advice. And the advice is good. When Amazon recommends a book for me, I usually like it. There's never been a case when it recommended a book for me that I didn't enjoy reading. Once, it captures your attention and gains your trust, then it has enormous power. It actually say, it hears you talking to your wife or to your husband or to whatever, and it hears you talk about an electric bike, and then comes up with a suggestion, maybe you should consider this electric bike. Previous proposals, suggestions were good. They will then, the probability that you'll buy that bike is much higher. And that gives Jeff Bezos, who owns Alexa, who owns Amazon.com, an opportunity to do two magnificent things. Magnificent in the sense that they are historically pioneering things that had never happened before.
Correct.
It allows you, firstly, it allows them to sell you the object of the desire it has implanted into your soul outside of any marketplace. You don't have to go to a shop. Amazon sends it to you.
Right.
And the second thing is that Bezos retains 40% of the price. That's a rent. He hasn't produced this thing.
Right.
This is a rent very, very similar to the ground rent that feudal lords used to extract from peasants, from ironsmiths, from artisans who lived and worked on their fiefdom. But Amazon has to be thought of not as a market, but as a fiefdom. That cloud capital, which creates Amazon, bestows upon its owner, Bezos, a remarkable capacity to extract rents from you, me, customers, and the producers of the electric bicycles.
Correct.
It's not capitalism anymore. It's not a marketplace. It's a digital fief, and it's not profit that accumulates wealth. It is rent. Well, that's feudalism. That's why I'm talking about techno-feudalism. And that kind of business model, that techno-feudal system, is enhanced by AI. And they don't have to worry about the Chinese because the Chinese have their own techno-feudal system. The equivalent of Amazon is Alibaba. And they have the same capacity to enclose within its digital cloud walls their own population.
Yeah, we've definitely seen the rise of China in that capacity. And do you think that there's any difference between these cloud capitalists in China versus America? Or are they more or less the same thing?
Well, individually, they are more or less the same thing. They're neither good people nor bad people with enormous power. You give exorbitant power to normal people, you get very abnormal people in the end. So there's no comparison. There's no difference there. But there is a fundamental difference in the political system. Because when the Chinese Amazon, Alibaba, reached a level of rent extraction, which was detrimental to the interests of the rest of the Chinese social economy, in the same way that it is happening in America and in Europe with Amazon, Uber, and so on. The Magnificent Seven, who are really extracting so much rent from everybody else. It's pathetic. Right. In China, the Chinese Communist Party grabbed the Jeff Bezos of China by the scruff of the neck and said, Jack Ma is his name, you overdid it. No. We'll give you the opportunity to enjoy huge riches, but not that much. So they put him in the sin bin for, 8 months? And when he came back, he had his wings clipped. And the rent that Alibaba extracts from the rest of society has been thoroughly circumscribed. We all wax lyrical, and we Greeks, of course, are very flattered by that, about the continuity between ancient Athenian democracy and our democracies. There's no such continuity. This is an absolute myth. The ancient Athenian democracy was very flawed because women didn't vote. Metics, that is, migrants didn't vote. I think Trump would have been happy with that. It was a small section of society, of men who were citizens, but interestingly, the majority of them were poor. So in that sense, it was democratic, not aristocratic, that the poor were in the majority, and they could actually, for 30, 40 years, if that's how long it lasted. It didn't last much longer than that. Right. They had the opportunity to pass laws and make decisions that peeved the aristocrats, the wealthy, the oligarchs. So that was a genuine democratic experiment for 30, 40 years. But whereas our democracies, and I think the Republican Party is correct to say this is not a democracy, it's a republic. Our democracies hark back not to ancient Athens, but to the Magna Carta. And what was the Magna Carta? It was nothing to do with democracy. It was a pact between the king, lost the war. Putin has not won it, but Ukraine has lost the war. It is exhausted. Its people's morale is below zero. There are daily defections from the Ukrainian army. They fought magnificently, and all kudos to them for having stemmed the initial push by the Russian army. But now, 3 years later, they are done. It's clear that even Zelensky understands that. Biden knew that. Kissinger's dictum that it is very dangerous to be America's enemy, but it is even more dangerous to be America's friend has been confirmed once again. Correct. Because effectively the Biden administration led the Ukrainians down the garden path. They made them promises that they were never willing to fulfill. They were never going to introduce them to let them into NATO. Right. It was simply in the interest of expanding U.S. hegemony. I remember a former chief of staff of NATO, an American general, many years ago, in 2011. I was asking him, why do we still have NATO? What's the point? He said, there's no point for you Europeans, but we need it. And I said, Bob was his name, why do we need it? Or why do you need? And he said, for 3 reasons. To keep Russia out, to keep Germany down, and to keep ourselves in.
Wow.
So that's, and I think he was completely right. But, Trump doesn't have this mentality. For Trump, the Ukraine war was a big strategic mistake. It cost a lot of money. It was never going to be won. It was always going to lead to yet another American defeat, like Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, now Ukraine, and humiliation. And it was a major distraction to what his number one priority, which is a war with China. Cold War, hopefully, not a hot war, but
Correct.
he thinks that there is one game in town on the planet, and that is the containment of China. So what on earth are we doing? Wasting our resources and losing a lot of soft power worldwide with a war in Ukraine, which essentially is pushing Russia into the embrace of Beijing. Kissinger and Nixon did their utmost to keep those two forces apart.
Correct.
And now Biden has pushed Ukraine into the embrace of Beijing. This is how he thinks. Personally, I think he's completely wrong, and it's extremely dangerous. It's a clear and present danger for humanity to want to contain China. China is not an imperialist power. It's a regional power. It wants to control its region. There's no interest in building Chinese bases in Tijuana opposite San Diego, or patrolling the San Francisco, Los Angeles coastline. They just want to do business with everyone else. And to try to contain China in this way, risking a thermonuclear clash, is highly, highly toxic on the part of Trump. But I do hope that he concludes this pointless massacre in Ukraine quickly. And I think he's right to do it simply by talking to Putin, because the Europeans are non-existent. Who is he going to bring along from Europe? Von der Leyen. Nobody elected her. She has absolutely no legitimacy whatsoever.
Correct.
You know, a local town mayor here has more legitimacy than the president of the European Commission. France doesn't have government. Correct. Macron is a lame duck. The new government that will emerge from the federal elections in Germany this weekend will take months to come together. It will be a silly coalition again, just to keep the idea out. And even if they did have a government, the Lithuanians and the Poles would veto anything the Germans say and expect the Germans to pay for the outcome that the Germans will not have a say in. So if I were Trump, I also would leave the Europeans out, and I will try to come to the most important thing at the moment: freeze the conflict, ceasefire. If we can save a few thousand people from dying tomorrow morning, we have a moral duty to save them, because their death is utterly pointless. Well, if you are a German manufacturer of chemicals or of steel or aluminium, your viability depends on the United States, because you're running, and Trump is right in this, you're running a large trade surplus with the United States. Essentially, the American trade deficit is like a vacuum cleaner that sucks into the United States your net exports.
Right.
You get paid with IOUs called dollars, because the United States is a deficit country. Any other country having the deficits of the United States would have gone bankrupt by now, except that the United States has the exorbitant privilege of the international reserve currency, the dollar. So they can print as many of them, of those as they want, to maintain in perpetuity almost this trade deficit. But that trade deficit is the German capitalists' godsend. It is what keeps him in business.
Right.
So when, for instance, you remember a couple of years ago, Nord Stream 1, which is this large underwater pipeline bringing cheap Russian gas into Germany, powering German industry. This was blown up. Now we know that it was the United States and Ukraine behind.
Correct.
With the help of Poland. They've more or less admitted. Okay. Now you are the German industrialist. They just blew up your supply of cheap gas. They are selling you at 10 times the price Texan liquefied natural gas, which takes ages to come, and you have to pay huge quantities of money in order to build terminals. Right. Whereas you had this pipeline that was bringing you, dirt cheap gas from Putin, right? So they blow this up, and you don't say a word, not a peep, no criticism whatsoever. Why? Because you rely on the United States trade deficit to keep selling stuff. That is the reason for the vassalage of Europe on the United States. It is the US trade deficit, which of course Trump wants to eliminate.
Right.
And when you are sitting in the boardroom of the large German corporations and you hear that Trump wants to eliminate the US trade deficit, you think, oh my God, let him fail, please.
Is the European Union, are they going to have to move closer to China to survive these new sanctions and tariffs from Donald Trump?
Let's step back from Donald Trump. Under Biden, a directive came from Washington to Brussels. Stop trading with the Chinese. Impose tariffs on electric vehicles from China. It's not that the tariffs imposed upon Chinese electric vehicles were the idea of the Europeans. They were not imposed in order to save the German car industry from Chinese competition. Indeed, it is Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, Stellantis, who are against the tariffs that Europe imposed on Chinese car imports. Right. Because they're doing a lot of business, especially Mercedes and BMW and Volkswagen. They're doing a lot of business in China. And the last thing they want is for the Chinese to reciprocate, to retaliate. So you have a Europe that's effectively a vassal of the United States under Biden. But in the context of the subjugation of the European Union to NATO and to the idea of the transatlantic alliance with the United States, European leaders, they held their nose and they imposed sanctions on Chinese imports. They started pressurizing their businesses to invest less in China in the context of the American plan to decouple from China, in the context of the American-led new Cold War against China, against the interests of Europe. So Europe was acting against the interests of Europe to decouple from China just in order to be America's effectively good boys and girls. And then Trump comes in and says, I'm going to treat you like enemies. What will the Europeans do in response? I don't know. Clearly, Europe's interest is to turn around to the Americans and say, okay, if we are your enemies and you're if you're going to treat us like dirt, forget, we are rescinding all these tariffs we imposed on the Chinese and all these restrictions on capital investments by European firms in China that we imposed simply because you told us to. Right. So, it's a new sheriff in town, fine. There are new rules in Europe as well. But that will take a smidgen of, how shall I put it, courage on behalf of the Europeans, which they have shown no evidence of so far. When people say that they think Trump is very fickle and they have no idea what he's going to do, they have not been paying attention. Trump does what he has been telling us he will do for years now.
Right.
Why are they being surprised? He said he's going to impose tariffs, he imposed tariffs. He said that NATO is pointless and that he is not going to be paying for European security. He's pulling the rug from under the Europeans. Why is he fickle? You may not believe your ears because you simply are in deep denial. But that's not Trump's fault.
Right.
I don't want to support Trump here, but what I'm saying is that the guy is utterly reliable. He does what he claimed, and when he didn't, under Trump 1.0, do what he was planning to do, that's because Congress wouldn't let him and because he was not well prepared in his first term. But allow me to have a very different view of why Europe is so wedded to the so-called security umbrella of the United States.
Sure.
It's not because we need the American military to defend us from the Russians. Under the Soviet Union, maybe, let's not go that far back, but since 1991, Europe does not have any enemy that can actually invade Europe with any degree of credibility and military prowess. Putin has been trying to create this military capability, but you can see that even when he unleashed an all-out war against Ukraine, he's struggling to get a few villages in muddy plains in the Ukraine. And, thousands and thousands of Russians are being sacrificed for a few yards every week or so. There's no way that even if Putin wanted to invade Poland, even if he wanted to invade Germany, there is no way he could do it. And I think our leaders know that. So what is really behind this monomaniacal commitment to the Atlanticist? Well, the Chinese, who are the real power behind the BRICS, are creating the infrastructure for a new monetary system that replaces the monopoly of the dollar. They're not going to be stopped by Trump's threats of tariffs. The greatest ally of the hegemony of the US dollar at the moment is Beijing, because Beijing has not decided to press the button. BRICS Pay, which is based on a blockchain technology, and it's magnificent technology and very, very interesting. It's an alternative to SWIFT, a way of making payments from one another. It's not, however, an alternative currency. Right. And it's not because the Chinese have not decided to go for it, because the Chinese have at least $4,500 billion US dollars in savings. So if let's say you had your money in a Swiss bank account, you would not want to undermine the Swiss banking system. It would be silly to do this.
Right.
So they've not decided to do that. As I said before, if you are an aluminium producer in Shenzhen and you're selling to California, why would you want to undermine the hegemony of the dollar? You live off dollars. But if the United States continue to pursue the new Cold War against China, especially the way that Biden turbocharged it with the CHIPS Act, effectively telling the Chinese, you are not going to become a technologically advanced society, which of course didn't work because they have so many good engineers that devised their own microchips. And then at some point, they will be absolutely determined, they already are determined, to have a monetary system which is ready for action. They need to have it, at an arm's length, at a push button length, so they can press it when they decide that enough is enough. But they have not decided to do this yet. They will make the system ready, but they will not energize it until they give up on the possibility of a decent agreement with Trump and with the West. So, Mr. Trump, stop hyperventilating and threatening the Chinese. They are your best friends at the moment. And if you push them too much, then the dollar is toast.